what we do, how we can help them, and so on. So your interest in today's event is most welcome, and your daily work in publicizing the work that we do is also very welcome. I would like at the end of the year to thank you. We've issued many media statements, which you have very, very generously carried, which have reached then all the corners of the country. I would like to say thank you. But let me come back to today. The trends analysis reports provided a general overview of the handling of complaints for the years under review. They provide statistical information on the numerous and number of types of complaints received, complaints that have been referred to other organizations, and complaints that have been finalized by the Commission. The methods that we have used in order to finalize the complaints, as well as the narrative analysis of the complaints that have been lodged. The reports also document the use of the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Now, ADR is a very important instrument in the promotion of human rights, for the simple reason that when rights are violated or are threatened and you use ADR, you are likely to correct the violation at the same time to preserve social cohesion, in the sense that people agree that a violation has been done and there is a withdrawal, there is a learning process in there, and therefore there is the preservation of social cohesion. People do not go away with a victor and a loser in that regard. So we use ADR, we use litigation, investigations, and national hearings for the years under review. The trends inform Parliament and the public of the trends in human rights violations reported to the Commission through the complaints mechanisms and the interventions it has undertaken as a consequence to those complaints, or on the basis of its own initiative. The reports provide insight into the types of human rights violations occurring in the country, and has assisted the Commission to adopt a more integrated approach to executing its mandate and resolving complaints received, and to identify issues that require strategic intervention through litigation services, advocacy, research, and other means. The trends also serve as a baseline to inform future strategic initiatives of the Commission. For example, they highlight areas in terms of focal areas where a greater attention is needed. We need, of course, to improve the trends analysis or the collection of data that we put in the trends analysis. We know that the reach to the far-flung rural areas is still a challenge, but we're working on it. The awareness is still a challenge, and we're working on it. Perhaps when there is greater awareness, we will get more people coming to the Commission, and we'll get a more refined product out of it. I know that the Kenyans have got a system in terms of which they even capture the intensity as per a particular area as to what is happening there, and then they use that to formulate the strategy going forward. They use that to decide on how to allocate resources, and we are looking at a similar operation where we will be able to say we think that this is the greatest need in terms of violations, and it is happening here and it's not happening there, and so on, and we then allocate resources accordingly. I will not delve, of course, into the contents of the report, as the drafters of the report will certainly do that. However, I would like to take this time to thank the staff of the Human Rights Commission who have worked very hard in the quest for human rights protection. I'd like to specifically mention their leaders, the CEO, the COO, provincial managers, the legal services unit, which has put this thing together, and many other staff members who have made a very meaningful contribution to the report. Their hard work and dedication can clearly be seen in this report. As the report states, the annual performance plan of the Commission sets a target for finalization of cases at 85% per financial year. The Commission has both reached and exceeded this target over the past 4 years. The highest finalization percentage was reached at the end of 2013-2014 financial year, where 93% of cases were finalized. You will note that the report records that at the end of 2016-2017 financial year, the percentage of finalization was 87%. Without taking too much time, let me hand over to the program director, who will hand over to the presenters, who will give us more details on the report and what it can show us about the state of human rights in this country. Once again, however, let me thank you very much for being with us for the whole year up to today, and I look forward to our close cooperation with the media in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Alex, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay.
Ms. Alexander Fitzgerald is from the Legal Services Unit, and we'll now do.
Okay. Thank you so much. Chair has given quite a good background on the purpose of the report and why we produce it. The Commission has produced an annual trends analysis report since the 2012-13 financial year. This one specifically is for the financial year starting 1 April 2016 to 31 March 2017. What we do is we look at that complaints data that we've received for the specific financial year, but we also evaluate it in the context of the preceding years in order to determine the trends in the complaints data that we've picked up. So the trends analysis report, as you can see from the slide on the screen, includes a national snapshot of complaints registered with the Commission. It also highlights the top 5 and the bottom 5. Here I've just put out for you the top 5 rights violations reported to the Commission, starting in the first year that we started the report, 2012 to 2013, up until 2016-2017. As you can see, over the 5-year period of review, the largest number of human rights violations reported to the Commission concern an equality rights violation. The report will reflect that the vast majority of these complaints are related to allegations of racial discrimination against Black South Africans. Race-based discrimination presents the greatest challenge to the work of the Commission, as evidenced by the volume and frequency of race-related complaints received by our provincial offices and our head office. The volumes have certainly increased dramatically over 2015-2016, only to dip slightly in 2016-2017. In relation to these race-based complaints, our provincial offices have instituted proceedings in equality courts across the country to resolve race-based equality complaints. The majority of the cases that we litigated in the equality courts involved the use of the K-word and other derogatory comments, including baboon, arp, or monkey. One of the more high-profile matters during the 16-17 financial year was where the Commission represented Constable Clement Mkondo against Ms. Vicky Momberg. That was done by the Gauteng Provincial Office. They instituted proceedings in the Randburg Eastern Cape High Court. The court found in favor of the Commission on behalf of the constable and found that Ms. Momberg's comments constituted hate speech in terms of Section 10 of PAPUDA, and she was ordered to undertake community service, apologize unconditionally, participate in sensitivity training, and pay an amount of 100,000 rand. The Commission is particularly happy with the high-profile complaints that it's been able to resolve, because we think that the high-profile nature of those complaints sends a strong message that racism is a serious violation of the rights to equality and dignity and is unacceptable within our constitutional democracy. You can also see from the side on the screen that in 2016-17, the number of economic and social rights related complaints, which include healthcare, food, water, and social security, increased quite dramatically. We're not surprised to see this increase and this complaint trend, given the endemic poverty that we're still seeing in South Africa and growing wealth and income inequality. We're also seeing, obviously, that there still remains inadequate access to basic services, which are critical for maintaining human dignity and which still affect a majority of South Africans. These problems specifically, because of their endemic nature, tend to be very long-term and often remain unresolved for many years because departments or local government are often unable to or do not have the skills, capacity, or resources to resolve these matters. So these social and economic rights complaints represent some of the most pressing challenges facing South Africa, but we are also hopeful as a Commission that perhaps the increase in complaints being registered at the Commission might also be an indication that people regard the Commission as a body which is able to address these complaints, and so what is happening is that we're also attracting more complaints than we did previously. In previous years, possibly due to our advocacy events that we've been having, we've seen a lot of uptake, we've done a lot of community outreach programs, so we're hopeful that that is also a reflection of more people knowing what the Commission does and what we're capable of. The Chair has also referred to our use of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. This is a reflection of trying to use non-litigious mechanisms in order to resolve complaints so that we can be more effective, so that we can resolve our complaints more efficiently. As you can see from the side, 90% of our complaints that were resolved through ADR were resolved successfully. The race-based complaints still account for the highest number of ADR resolution mechanisms that we used. On average, 34% of all complaints addressed through ADR mechanisms were race-related. This has remained consistent. In all provinces, the racism complained of was, for the most part, as indicated before, derogatory comments based on race directed at black people, which violated their right to dignity. Even though we have increasingly moved towards an ADR resolutive process, we are still obviously litigating, and we've done a number of high-profile matters. I've just put on the slide a few of our matters that we've done, but most of our matters that we've litigated included racism and utterances of racial epithets, typically in the equality courts. We've also litigated on the basis of unfair discrimination on the grounds of disability, culture, and sexual orientation. Our litigation on racism we feel is really important because we think that we're on the forefront of the discourse of how complaints of alleged racism are resolved. We also have done a number of recurring socio-economic rights issues, including denial of access to land and housing, particularly on behalf of marginalized communities. And these include eviction applications, housing applications, water, sanitation, litigious matters that concern degrading living conditions, where we've particularly looked at the compounded effect that those issues have on women and children living in marginalized and vulnerable communities in South Africa. We also saw during the 16-17 financial year, there was an uptake of a different kind of case that we have been increasingly involved in, and that concerns interrogating practices in the financial sector, particularly where those practices are harmful towards vulnerable and marginalized communities. So we've been involved in challenges against systems of business lending, the law on defaulting debtors, and specifically practices that cause harm, financial harm to vulnerable and marginalized South Africans, especially in the context of endemic unemployment and deepening poverty in South Africa. So we've increasingly are looking at unscrupulous business practices that exploit poor South Africans, and we note that they've historically gone unchallenged as a general proposition. So cases like this have a wide capacity to have a substantial impact on the lives of large communities through those precedents. So I think you'll most likely see the Commission looking into those cases and continuing our work in that area. Of course, we also have our investigative reports. Aside from our involvement in litigation, we have at our disposal. This means to directly address complaints reported to the Commission. So we can, of our own accord or at the request of our complainants, conduct investigations into a complaint and based on our findings make a determination of remedial action to be taken by state departments, and we are obviously empowered through our Act to make recommendations on that basis. The advantage of holding an investigative hearing or using our investigative report mechanism is that it facilitates an immediate response. We can reach out to state departments and respondents immediately concerning the alleged violation. We make findings based on the outcome of those investigations that we can conduct, and then we provide detailed recommendations to relevant respondents, asking them to take certain steps to resolve the issue or limit the harm. We have noted that we do have an issue with non-compliance with the Commission's recommendations. That's been a historic issue that we've had. It is continuing. Often we don't receive responses or we don't receive timeliest responses. So this does seriously impact on levels of quality and service delivery and planning and effective policy implementation. There is a general lack of awareness of human rights and responsibilities for the fulfillment of human rights within the public service, which results in delays in implementing our recommendations, especially where they're aimed at long-term collective reforms. So non-compliance for us is probably our most serious issue. It compromises the prospect of attaining a culture of human rights in organs of states. We have used many approaches. We use soft approaches, we use harder approaches. We've used our subpoena powers in the most recent financial year. But in any event, the Commission remains committed to resolving human rights issues at using any of the mechanisms that are at our disposal and which are available to us to do so. We also have noted the landmark judgment of the Constitutional Court regarding the remedial action and powers of the public protector, and noting that the recommendations in that case were regarded as binding, and take this opportunity to remind our stakeholders that the Commission is tasked with and mandated to promote, advocate and respect human rights in South Africa, and we are very much committed to our mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Right, I think we're going to open it up to questions now. May I request that you please identify yourself before you ask a question? So are there any questions? Noted for anyone? All right, would you like to identify yourself?
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Govan Whittles from ENCA. My question relates to the very first slide on the number of race-based complaints. Could you please just specify in the provinces, which province had the most of these race-based complaints, and what type of pattern have you picked up in the type of complaints about racism? Is South Africa becoming more racist, or are more people reporting racism?
Thank you for your question. I suspect that it's a bit of both. The Commission has certainly undertaken more advocacy and media and communication, so I think that we're more visible, which is leading people to report to us. Also, where we represent complainants in high-profile matters such as the Vicky Momberg matter, that raises our profile as the Commission and also informs people that certain utterances are unacceptable, which may also encourage them to report more to the Commission. I don't think that we would deduce that South Africa was becoming more racist. I think that we've certainly pointed in the report to aspects such as social media, which allows people to publish and reach much wider audiences. And if what they're publishing is derogatory or racist or hate speech, then obviously more people see it, will often receive a complaint about it. So that also increases reporting to the Commission as well. So social media certainly, I think, increase the visibility of certain behavior and conduct which may previously we would not have been aware of because it happened in a private setting. Our two high receipt offices are the Cape Town office and the Gauteng provincial office. They are the busiest offices and they receive the highest number of complaints, and it's the Gauteng provincial office that receives the most. So the majority of complaints across the board are all related to race-based equality complaints.
can you give a breakdown between Cape Town and Gauteng? Exactly how many of the, is that 705?
I don't have that information. Oh, sure.
Okay, I think if you look at page 23 of the report, which...
We've not read that as a report.
Okay. Okay, so... sure.
Okay, while Jay is talking. The Gauteng actually has the highest number of complaints according to the report, 38% as far as issues of equality are concerned, followed by Western Cape with 15% and KwaZulu-Natal at 14%. And we look at page 24 of the report, again the highest complaints under the equality sector will be issues of race, followed by disability issues, and then sexual orientation, social.
Yeah.
I think the important point is also that inequality is not just about race, but in the context of which we work in, inequality relates to discrimination based on age, belief, color, etc. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that disability and ethnic origin come after race as well, and they're equally important. And I think that Alex and Brian will speak a little bit more to it, but disability has been on the increase, and we have seen a significant increase in the number of inequality complaints related to disability. So while race is an important aspect, we also as a commission feel that it's very important that the other aspects of inequality that are equally important and do have an equally egregious impact on people's lives and on their human rights.
Certainly. I think also in this report we've increasingly noted the how intersecting identities also compound to create more human rights violations. So we're also seeing an intersecting issues where someone might be a black South African who is also disabled, or a black South African who is also gay. So we're seeing where those intersections are also serving to compound human rights violations on a number of different fronts as well. And that's something that we've probably for the first time noted in this report with trends analysis.
Do you have any other questions? Please identify yourself.
Angela from SABC Radio News. You spoke about debtors and unscrupulous business practices. Are these mainstream businesses, or is it people that are not registered?
It's mainstream businesses, predominantly.
So is it banks?
Including, we did have certain matters against banks that we were involved in, either as the applicant or as amicus curiae.
If I may also just come back to your question, because if you look at page 25 of the report, we have a couple of copies which we handed out to you. You'll see that the race-related complaints have decreased marginally, as Alex has pointed out, in this year, from 505 to 486. But as the report indicates, they do still remain extremely high on certain commission, but they have decreased. Angela, do you want to ask a second question?
Yes, I wanted to ask about subpoena powers. You spoke about that. Are you finding that most of the time you have to subpoena people in, or are they willing to participate?
Well, in most cases, people do come to the commission, especially people who are outside government. They readily come to the commission. You do get just a few people who do not come. I think the subpoena powers have become necessary when we deal with interaction with government. Often, government officials do not cooperate as required, of course, by the Constitution and by Section 4.2 of the South African Human Rights Commission Act, that organs of state are required to cooperate with the Commission in the execution of its duties. And you send reminders after reminders, and you find that you don't get any response, or you get a negative response, and then as a result of that, you then are forced to use the coercive measures. We in the Commission believe, as I said earlier on when I did the welcoming address, and I spoke about ADR, we believe that, it will help South Africa if we can work together and we can discuss things together and solve problems. So government officials, some of them do cooperate, but we have found that others actually just do not cooperate. So it's an area that still needs improvement.
Okay, I'll take your hand and then I'll go to you. So, you have another question? Would you mind if we take any question? I'll come back to you after this round.
Okay, I'm Carter and I see the from Japan. I'm just going to take us back to the race settlement form. I just wanted to know, with the type of complaints you get, are they based on one-on-one racial incidents or people finding that they're systematically being discriminated against because of their race? Not the keyword, not the group, rather than making links or because of their race.
I believe that the trends seem to indicate that it's majority cases of one-on-one instances, interpersonal, but obviously the Commission receives, it might not even be a big difference in the numbers. The Commission receives lots of complaints based on systemic racial oppression or marginalization as well, yes.
Just to add to that, where we do receive complaints that relate to labor-related matters, we are compelled to pass them on to the relevant body, so we would then, in some instances, pass those on to the CC and they have to report to another body. So we often have to be very cognizant of the other Chapter 9s that have been established to do different things. Okay.
Thanks. Jacques Willerick from Kyk Net Verslag. We have a problem with police brutality in South Africa, and I see category 2 arrested, detained, and accused persons. Those complaints. What type of complaints are we looking at here? Is this a type of classic assault that you'd see happening between police officers and people they're trying to arrest, or is there something else to this?
It's quite a mix. There are quite a few things that could relate to people who have been detained because they're migrants or asylum seekers or refugees, because we do have a lot of complaints regarding those aspects. Could relate, there are some complaints that we get that are related to police brutality, although in terms of our referral powers, then often the case is that might be better addressed by other organizations, for instance, IPID. But yes, illegally detained not being allowed their full rights under the Constitution that an arrested or detained person has, and instances of migrants and asylum seekers and refugees being detained in circumstances which don't comply to the applicable regulatory or legal frameworks.
Thanks. Just for the chairperson, Mr. Matola, you mentioned that access in rural areas is one of your main challenges. How much of an impact did that have on the findings of this report, and what is the Commission doing to try and get out to the rural areas? And then secondly, Mr. Gerald, you mentioned that the issues you were on was the access to land and housing and complaints around that. Could you just give some examples of what kind of complaints people are making about access to land and what the Commission is doing?
I must say that actually the Commission is doing a lot of work now to try and reach rural communities and to encourage government to make it possible for rural communities to access various rights. We are at the ground level, at the provincial level, for example, working with other Chapter 9 institutions. I've just signed an MOU with the Public Protector, but not to create something new, but to formalize the cooperative working relationship that you find in provincial offices where Chapter 9 institutions collaborate at provincial offices. They share information, they share platforms, and in that way, the reach, the advocacy reach, it goes further than it used to go. But of course, it still needs us to do a little bit more work. I toured the Eastern Cape earlier this year, and I went to some of the areas where I found that people were not very sure of the existence of the commission or what it is about, and so on. But understandably, because you find that in those areas, the level of development, the roads, communication, and so on is very poor. So when we met with the MEC, we told her that really they have to do something to reduce the urban-rural divide, because in some of the areas there's a big urban-rural divide. But we're doing the best we can in order to reach that. We are using the media, as you know, and you help us a lot, as I said, in reaching those areas, but we can do more. We may need to do pamphlets that are in all languages, distribution, visiting those areas becomes a problem. For example, in very big provinces with small offices, with small staff, it becomes difficult to reach every part of the province. But we're getting there. But we need to do more.
If I can just add, if I may, Chair, so the Commission does have quite a widespread advocacy and outreach program which operates through all 9 provinces. In the 2016 year, we reached 51,759 people. In the following year, 2016-17, we reached 83,000 people. So we are seeing an incremental increase in the reach. We are using various ways to try to reach rural and marginalized communities. Each of our provincial offices do have advocacy officers who go out and do rural outreach. We often do them in conjunction with other Chapter 9, so we would go out with the public protector. We have a range of ways of trying to reach rural communities. One of them is to train the trainer, so we have human rights focal points in communities that can then assist communities to understand. Also just bearing in mind the complexity of our Constitution in trying to make it simple, trying to make it accessible. We have, in the last year, translated our advocacy materials into all 11 languages in order to assist people in far-flung areas to understand, because rights knowledge is central to rights assertion. If people don't understand their rights, they cannot come to the Commission to lay complaints about their rights. Also bearing in mind the fact that race is still regarded as the most primary site of inequality in the country, that a lot of people don't understand that they have other kinds of rights as well. So we're also on a campaign to try to educate people so that when they do bring complaints, they can distinguish between what is a human rights violation based on race or a complaint which is based on something else, so that we can start to get the public to understand their rights so that they can make proper complaints, so that our statistics begin to reflect the actual human rights situation on the ground. So we've made significant strides in the last 3 years as a Human Rights Commission with respect to our visibility. We've particularly used community media and have been monitoring the use of community media, and are noticing a significant uptake of human rights reporting in community newspapers and often drops that are often written in the languages of those communities. So we would say that our advocacy and outreach work definitely did have impact on the outcomes of the report, because that's what enables people to lodge complaints with the Human Rights Commission.
If I may add, there are 2 other things which are doing. We should also help ourselves, and extend our reach to far-flung communities, which is the rural community, and also marginalized communities. One is that next year the Commission will be working together with the Department of Basic Education, Department of Justice, and Center for Human Rights and University of Victoria to run the school's moot court competition. And we've been informed by the Department of Basic Education that as a competition on human rights will now be compulsory in all schools in the country for grade 10 and 11. And therefore helping the Commission to reach out to all schools in the country and therefore by implication rural areas. This actually presents a very important opportunity for the Commission to actually use the schools to extend its reach. We also have an MOU with SAHRC Foundation, which also runs programs in schools, and our staff members assist in providing human rights education in the schools which the SAHRC Foundation is working at. This has also helped us also to reach areas where we have not been before. And then we have also recently signed a memorandum of agreement with South African Police, to see how we can work with the police, in advancing human rights. We're actually meeting tomorrow in Pretoria, to discuss, how best we can work together. And you can imagine we have over 1,000 police stations in this country, and we were able to basically utilize those police stations in a much more effective manner. That will also be increasing our mandate. We are currently also in discussions with SAHRC to actually draft, to sign an MOU where we can then work with SAHRC and reach out to local government across the country, all the areas in this country. So we are concerned, of course, about us reaching out to all South Africans as possible, and all people in this country as possible.
Okay, you've been hearing for the past half an hour or so, but more about human rights violation trends, and it's a national snapshot of complaints received by the Commission, and high up there was race-related complaints.
And this day feeds into the International Human Rights Day. You saw last week Friday President Cyril Ramaphosa giving a speech together with the UN Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet at the Constitution Hill in commemoration of this day, which is 70 years ago, celebrated the 10th of December every year. But it really commemorates a day in 1948 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It's an important conversation to have. Another, in terms of the complaints, it was economic and social rights complaints. And I guess these represent some of the more pressing issues that South Africans are facing. And some of the busiest offices in the country, Cape Town and the Gauteng province.
Yeah, but also important, this day also marks the end of the 16 days of no violence against women and children campaign internationally.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break. The agenda back after